Every problem in life can be boiled down to a relationship problem. How's your sex life? How's your relationships at work, with your parents, friends? This episode is sponsored by the Truism Centered Life's 30-Day Relationship Challenge. Check it out at truismcenteredlife.com. Rob's 30-Day Relationship Challenge is designed to help you feel more connected to those around you. It's a 30-day journey of self-discovery using resilience training and relationship psychology to help you feel stronger and happier with the relationships in your life. Welcome to Season 5 of the Color Success Podcast, where we talk with guests from AAPI and ethnic minority communities and have real discussions about mental health and what success looks like. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wang. Before we get into it, remember to subscribe to our mailing list for free at colorsuccesspodcast.com so you don't miss any updates. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. Chinese-Scottish-Canadian Blake Abbie was born in Montreal and grew up in Vancouver. A trained classical singer, Blake began working in fashion while studying in Paris and later London. He has worked as an editor at Fashion Culture Publications, System and Document, and is currently the editor-at-large of A Magazine, curated by. Alongside fashion, Blake is an actor and was cast in the Netflix and Hunan TV co-production, Meteor Garden. He currently stars in the Netflix reality show Bling Empire, New York. I'm so excited to have Blake Abbie here with me because I watched Bling Empire. I'm a huge fan, and he came off so nice. And even when I'm setting up this interview with him, he is just so responsive. And so I'm trying not to fangirl. So Blake, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. You're making me blush here. I don't know.
Well, we have so much to unpack because obviously the show is a snippet of your life and who you are. And so you talked a lot about fluidity of identity, which is huge for so many people. And I'm from the Bay Area, and so that's a huge topic. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you kind of identify, and we're trying to explain it on the show?
Yeah, I guess quite directly, I do identify as a cis male. If we're going to talk about gender, I have never. Oh, that's not true. I guess there are moments in my life that I was like, oh, I definitely question my gender identity. And I guess in certain ways, there are moments I feel much more masculine, moments I feel much more feminine. So I guess in my everyday life, I'm very happy to receive the pronouns he, him, but simultaneously, I think they, them are also pronouns that I'm becoming more and more comfortable with. Just because, there are certain things that we align with the idea of what he, him masculinity stands for, and I don't necessarily fully align with that. And in terms of also, I talk about my queerness on the show. Which it's very funny because I grew up in a space. I'm also a West Coaster. I'm Canadian. I'm from Vancouver. And so there is, I think, this kind of, for lack of a better term, this hippie kind of forward thinking, at least, that is embedded in kind of our language and dialogue just kind of growing up. And, for me, I guess I kind of always knew I wasn't this heterosexual man. I've always grown up being interested in music, and yes, these are kind of tropic things, but being interested in creative pursuits. But the idea of gayness or homosexuality didn't really, and still really does not feel aligned to me, because I think there's kind of a culture that we are fed, we'll say,
yes,
around gayness, without, for lack of a better term, around gayness, that really just does not align with me. One, maybe because it's very white male, white cis male.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in these gay spaces, I feel very othered. And I think there's like a expectation in some way that we, or people as gay, we'll say men, have to engage in this culture, and that really just doesn't feel right for me. Even if I work in fashion, which is all, ultimately people align, believe that to be quite a homosexual space, but I really don't. I don't kind of align my. I don't. Yeah, I don't know what. For lack of a better term, I just don't feel myself in that. And so I think what was really interesting, and I don't know how far it comes across as in the show, is that like I really wanted to portray myself as authentically as I could, as someone who is interested in all types of people. Like I am interested in men and women, and it kind of became a little bit like a catchphrase. I feel like I say it in a few places. I'm interested in men. I'm interested in women. I'm interested in trans men, trans women, non-binary people. But it really is that, I first in some conversations would describe myself as a sapiosexual, someone who is interested in someone's brain, less, rather than their kind of gender makeup or their physical self.
I love that. And you're teaching me something new because I've never heard that, like just interested in your brain. And I think that kind of brings you to a more human level where you're not focusing on race, gender, sexual orientation, etc., but really,
No.
do I like this human being and can I see myself spending the rest of my life with that person?
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, exactly. Took it out of my mouth.
Well, that kind of explains actually why you're so nice because you're Canadian and you have forward thinking and so forth. But that's the other side, right? You're Scottish, Chinese, Canadian. What was it like to grow up in a kind of a multicultural space? And you do speak Chinese as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I again, I was very lucky to grow up with the parents that I have. There is no question, people always say, oh, they're very accepting of me, but my parents were just like, there was no question of who I was. I was just always myself,
mhm.
which for so many people isn't the case. And again, that was what I was really, I don't want to say I was struggling to make clear with the producers, but on the show, like, and sorry to go back to the queerness
Yeah.
question, but in particular with the queerness question, so much of like the dialogue that is portrayed, so many of the stories that are put out in media today around queerness, so around homosexuality, etc., or like lifestyles that kind of divert from like what we would consider like the norm, again in
Right.
quotations, that there's a struggle around that there is kind of a shame around that. And I really did not have that growing up because of the parents I have. Um, and so, yeah, my hope was to share and show that life can be different, that you can just be yourself and you can be accepted, and, or you could just be without the expectation of having to be accepted. But yeah, back to this like cultural, multiracial background. I was again very lucky to have the parents that I have because they celebrated each one's culture.
Mm.
Um, my mother is from Hangzhou, China. This is the city near Shanghai in the south, and my dad's Scottish. They both grew up in kind of hard times. My dad is a little bit older than my mom. Well, a little bit meaning 20, 25, 26 years. It's not
Eh,
insignificant.
yeah.
Well, look, they found love
Yeah, exactly.
and they made me and they raised me, and so I'm very grateful for that. But they both grew up in hard times. My mom grew up during revolution in China. My dad grew up during the war, Second World War in Edinburgh, and so I guess not to say that they had similar backgrounds, but they kind of had similar values when it comes to working and I guess money. Oftentimes money is a question. But yeah, always growing up, we were celebrating Chinese New Year. Lantern Festival is tonight, tomorrow. We'd celebrate Scottish holidays. I mean, like more Christian centered holidays like Christmas and Easter. New Year's Eve was a big thing in Scotland. It's called Hogmanay, and so we would always celebrate those. And so, and both sets of families. It's not just my parents, and that was really, I think, was really significant for me. Is that like my grandmother, my uncle on my mom's side, my aunt would celebrate the kind of Christian traditions, or we'll say quote unquote Canadian Scottish ones, if we were together. And then my aunts and my grandparents on my dad's side would also celebrate the Chinese ones. It was nice because I was able to get red envelopes from my aunts, and so growing up, I would get a lot more than I guess I would have expected to. Um, so that was really amazing. I think also, and I think I maybe touched in other interviews, but like growing up in Canada, I think we do approach the language around race and culture in a very different way than I guess in the States. For better or for worse, I'm not sure, but there was this idea of multiculturality of Canada, and Canada is a patchwork or a melting pot of many people's different cultures. And yes, again, in some moments it's a good thing, in some moments it's a bad thing. But yeah, growing up, I was celebrating all my friends' cultures. I grew up with a friend who was half Korean, half Polish. Another friend who was half Canadian, white Canadian, and half, I guess her mother, I think she was Trinidadian or Jamaican actually. And then another friend who was also Scottish, and then another friend who was Cantonese. And then I had a Jewish friend. And in school, it was really important, I think, for our teachers to be able to recognize that. Yeah, it was an amazing thing. And I living in the States, I recognize that a lot of my friends, Asian friends, will say, since we're talking, I'm an Asian person, and so they just didn't have that.
Yeah.
They didn't have that. A lot of their stories are about the shame of taking their kimbap to school or their fried rice. And yeah, of course I had moments of like, oh, my soggy noodles, they're like, not so great. But I had friends who were also bringing kimbap to school, and so it was like we could kind of share in that. So that was really important to me. Yeah, I think that really was so foundational for who I am.
So contrast that now. You do live in the States and you've learned a lot more about people's stories here as well. And I mean, you're in Bling Empire, so you're around a lot of luxury fashion. And I know that that's not all there is to it, but how does that contrast with maybe some of the things that you've been around growing up versus now?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I only ever knew myself to be in kind of like a middle class family, and my parents kind of worked their way up to maybe being an upper middle class. But we are a family that comes from, my dad is working class from Scotland. Like
Right.
my grandfather had a paint and wallpaper shop. Like he doesn't come from this like crazy background,
Ah,
and
do
a
you
lot
like
of
my wall? Do you like my wallpaper?
yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I mean, that's not to say that a lot of my castmates have families that come from those places as well. I mean, Lynn's
Absolutely.
father is self-made. Like he grew up in Indonesia and eventually moved to Singapore. He had like she was telling me, and this is really not maybe it's not my story to tell. He grew up with not so much.
Well, we can have Lynn come on and she can tell the story, but
Yeah, she can tell the story.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
But what you were saying was basically that a lot of your castmates have come from families that they started with nothing and they're self-made. So I guess talking a little bit more about that, do you think that gives people an appreciation of kind of where the wealth came from and the way that they approach spending money or showing that they have money?
Yeah, I think that definitely for some of us, that's how that's
I'm
how it
not, yeah,
is.
I'm gonna let you say that because I
Sure. I
definitely,
mean,
yeah.
no, I mean, I'm not here to call anyone out, and we all have different relationships with money, and we all come from slightly different economic spaces. But yeah, I mean, like, I think kind of overall though with New York, as a cast, but also New York kind of as a economic space in general, people with money don't explicitly show that they have money.
Mhm.
People take the train. I mean, it's at this time now it's a little bit more dangerous, I think, for certain people.
Yeah.
People of Asian descent. We can talk about that later, I think. But people take everyone takes a taxi. Everyone takes city bikes, and everyone walks around.
It's
New York, I think.
practicality too.
Honestly, yeah, it is, different places might be different. But yeah, in New York, everyone it's not so much about the money generally.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Anthony, shout out to him. He's a big fan, and so I said, "Oh, I'm interviewing Blake tomorrow. Like, what do you want to ask him?" And he was, he gave me a whole bunch of different things, but he actually sent me your women's health interview, and talking
Mhm.
about these aspects of Asian Americans in the West Coast versus the East Coast. He was wondering, like, what contrast do you see there? Because you mentioned that LA cast has a different like feel to them than the East Coast cast.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly so many layers. I think you, as a person from or who lives in the Bay, did you grow up in
I'm
the Bay?
born and raised in San Francisco.
Let's
Yep.
say so. Born and raised in San Francisco, you would probably consider yourself a different entity to someone who's from the SGV or from OC,
Yep.
right?
It's
And I think
different. Yeah, it's very
it's
different.
different. It's very different. Um, and I think that like Vancouverites will maybe be a little bit more aligned with like the Northern Californians, but East Coast versus West Coast, there are just more Asians on the West Coast. There's just kind of a more integrated also there's more integrated Asian culture into kind of like general society. People, I grew up having sushi for lunch.
Yeah.
I grew up, and it's crazy to me that people are like, we're going on this matcha craze now. And like literally,
Yeah.
I've grown up drinking matcha my whole life. And I'm like, oh, that's not,
Now
oh,
it's eight
okay.
dollars, Blake.
Now it's $8. I mean, I'm okay to pay. If it's good matcha, I'm okay to pay that.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not Japanese, and like the matcha was in our local coffee shops, not, like, and so I think that is one thing. So, and like, I think that East Coast Asians didn't necessarily have that. There's not that kind of like societal integration in the same way.
Sure.
Um, and we can also like we look at New York in particular, like Chinatown. Chinese people in New York are some of the most marginalized in the country, and so the kind of struggle that people have there, and I guess honestly certain types of vilification of the community in New York are associated with the fact that a lot of these people are a lot of the community in New York is really on or below the poverty line, and they have to stick to themselves. They stick within their spaces because there's no resources that are allocated to them because they are often forgotten about in the greater picture. Like there's a huge campaign going around New York right now, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but the mayor is trying to put in a mega jail in Chinatown,
Oh,
right?
lovely.
And unfortunately, some of the people within Chinatown, some of the richer families in Chinatown are supportive of that. But ultimately, it is going to affect what is the most like the poorest part of New York. Of all the five boroughs is Chinatown. And so there's that. And then of course there's like, the diaspora who maybe have come later in life, who've come from more like richer families. And so it's like I think the East Coast is definitely more layered. And I think for lack of not for lack of a better term, it is class. There's multiple and very explicit layers of class on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, maybe it's not as explicit. That said, I mean, like LA, there's people, of course, who have money and who have lots of money, but there's maybe a little bit more integration there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in the Bay Area, especially with the tech boom and we're the tech hub, I mean, there's just
Hmm.
the income disparity is just so huge. And I
It's
think,
massive.
yeah, and the idea is that there's this perception and it's going around everywhere, right? Well, Asians are successful, they have money, and it's like there's so many different groups even within that whole Asian label. And I'm not big on labels. Um, but that's the idea, is that as a group we're doing fine, we're not an ethnic minority anymore,
Right.
and it really puts so many at a disadvantage because
For
there's
sure.
still those microaggressions, there's still racism that happens because of the way we look, and we're not being evaluated based on our merit. So
No, I just want to speak to the fact that, like you say, yeah, we are grouped into this lump sum of Eastern faces.
Yes.
Um, but and yes, there's a very small portion of the community that is doing well, and maybe that's bumping us up. But the community is so incredibly diverse, like we'll have like there's South Asians who are, of course, a major part of the Asian diaspora. But let's like look specifically at East Asians and Southeast Asians, where we kind of maybe look more similar. You have Japanese, you have multiple, types of Chinese people.
Right.
You have Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotians, Thai, Singaporeans, Indonesians, Malaysian, yada yada yada. But like there are so many types of stories for all these people. Like you think in particular with the States and the history around American colonialism, imperialism in Asia, the effects that the U.S. have had against all of Southeast Asia, we'll say Vietnam in particular, and all onto Korea. Um, you know, those stories, the people, refugees from Vietnam, refugees essentially from Korea, those stories are incredibly different to the stories of the Chinese workers. Maybe the Chinese workers have come here not as refugees, have come here as migrant, like trying to find a better life for them, but they are also struggling in a very different way. They may be in a certain similar economic class, but their struggles and their needs are vastly different. And so it's incredibly layered. And so for me, like I don't really like this term AAPI that keeps on throwing, or that everyone throws around, because what do I have in like that is similar to a Samoan person, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying this by any means to say like, oh, I'm not that. I'm saying like we should recognize that they have a very different background, and then we have very, and it grouping us all together ultimately doesn't help anyone. It just makes like a blanket, blanket umbrella around us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
And there's just such rich history, even with the different countries. And that's why I really encourage my kids to learn about it. I'm the parent who sits their kids in front of the Jeremy Lin documentary and is like, we're going to
Mhm.
watch this. We're not going to
Yeah.
watch that.
Where's your
Right
family
tonight.
from?
So I'll so there's two sides. Both are from China, but my grandparents on my mother's side were immigrated here, and my dad's it's the great grandparents. So I'm like
Okay.
third or fourth generation based on like what side. And then my husband is Vietnamese, and he was born here, but his parents and his older brother came over here to
Right.
Vietnam during the war. So we have Chinese and Vietnamese children, and so they have both sides of that. And I think it is hard because it's like you want to transmit some of these values, and then others it's like you don't want to get into this space. This is where I'm at as a parent, is like you want to give your children every single opportunity that you can,
Mhm.
and you don't want them to be spoiled assholes. So I'm like, how do you balance that? You know what I mean? So I mean, if you have any advice, that would be great. But
Well, I'm not a parent. I think I'm a little bit away from that, but yeah, I don't know. I think that like you just don't spoil your kids. That's how my parents were. Like they never spoiled me. I mean, they definitely offered me a lot, but I never got everything I wanted, and it never was I mean, we never went on like luxury vacations. One, because like my parents probably thought they couldn't afford it, and now because they grew up in poverty, they're wanting to save. They're always like, my mom's always saying like, you got to save for the rainy day. I'm like, Mom,
yes.
like you're nearly retired now, like it's okay, we're good, we're okay, take care of yourself, please. Treat yourself once in a while to, I don't know, like a nice sandwich. Even.
A
No, but
matcha that
seriously,
costs $8.
yeah, no, but seriously, our parents really gave up so much for us. And so I think, yeah, I mean, there's definitely balance. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not really answering that question directly, I guess, but
Well, I guess that really does bring me to that other aspect, though, of you work very hard in the fashion industry, being an
I
editor.
appreciate you say that because it's not so explicitly shown on the show.
No, I mean that's the thing is the big line for me was when one of your castmates was saying like, "What do I do if my parents cut me off?" And you were so kind, Blake, so kind. You were like,
Was I?
"Get a job." It was like, "Hello, get a job." But that
Yeah.
just showed that nuance of like you do work, you're able
Mhm.
to be self-sufficient, and so what has it been like to kind of put in your dues, so to speak, and continue to work in that industry, and keep yourself grounded as your celebrity continues to rise?
Well, that's a weird word for you to use for me, but um, yeah, I guess I mean let's be honest. To begin with, like working in fashion, working in the creative field, I had to have a a safety net underneath me.
Mhm.
I never really relied on my parents when I left Vancouver, but my mother and my dad did pay for my college, which for so many people that's not the case. And I didn't come out of university with tons and tons of debt, and so I was able to use the savings that I earned working. Look, I worked at 1.6 jobs at once. I
Wow.
worked I worked retail job. I worked like another kind of visual merchandising job. I sang. I sang in a church. I did tutoring, and then there was one more. What did I do? I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh, I worked two retail jobs. That's what it was.
Every problem in life can be boiled down to a relationship problem. How's your sex life? How's your relationships at work, with your parents, friends? This episode is sponsored by the Truism Centered Life's 30-day relationship challenge. Check it out at truismcenteredlife.com. Rob's 30-day relationship challenge is designed to help you feel more connected to those around you. It's a 30-day journey of self-discovery using resilience training and relationship psychology to help you feel stronger and happier with the relationships in your life. So that's why
So
you have customer service skills, because I would get fired in like 10 seconds. Like my first day, 10 minutes. I'm super patient with my patients, but like
right.
if I had to deal with some of these people who are like bitching about coupons, I'm like, "Oh no."
Right. I mean, I think customer service there is definitely a line, but with friends and people I care about, I definitely push myself and push my boundaries. And maybe sometimes to my detriment, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I've always worked, I've always been really good with my money. I guess the one time I really asked my mom for money was my second month. I had moved to Paris. Yeah, I mean, it's a great place. But as a young person who is, I'm singing. This is when I was singing. I was like singing in a church, the American church, and making decent money. But I was also doing an internship at the same time. But like I had no money to pay. I have very little money to pay rent. And so the one time I really asked my mom, I was like, please, I would be so appreciative if you can pay my rent for this month, and I'll figure it out going forward. And she was like, of course.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, since then, like I guess the one trait that I did get from both my parents is that I really save. I'm very careful with my money. I mean, I don't drink. I don't really buy things, ironically. Like I shop hella sale. I'm just like I'm still I'm very careful with my money. Um, and so that's how I've kind of been able to like kind of function in the fashion industry. And I was very, very lucky. Certain things kind of lined up where I was able to have the resources and the finances to be able to move from London over Paris to London to then eventually along the way, like I worked in an advertising agency and was like working like 12, 14 hours a day in these kinds of agencies. It was an incredible opportunity because I learned so much. And I think
Mhm.
that kind of really kind of was laid the groundwork for the way I kind of approach all of my jobs. But then we started a magazine, and then the magazine I was able to like I did really well and kind of took over. I didn't think I would end up here, honestly. But I guess because I have certain type of work ethic, I guess some version of customer service, if that's how you're going to call it. And I'm really good at putting out other people's fires. And I'm
I can
willing,
tell. I can
all
tell
right,
that.
right.
Yeah.
So I'm willing just to kind of jump in and I'm like a problem solver in that way. And so, yeah, people liked me for that. And so I've been able to just kind of like grow myself within the fashion industry. It's not an easy place to be.
Yeah.
It does not pay enough. Anyone in the totem pole. It doesn't pay anyone enough in the totem pole. And so yeah, I am lucky to be able to function the way I have.
So you put out many fires on the show, and I think one of the questions that I had was, how do you balance out being there for your friends and at the same time filming? Because it's not easy to have cameras pointed at you during that whole time. And
Right.
Samora, and one of my friends, was really interested because Tina had to leave when those two
Mhm.
guys were there, and she discussed her experience and alluded to a lot of abuse that she's had to go through. So how do you
Yeah.
balance being there for Tina and also the cameras are rolling?
Yeah. That was a really hard night to film. We had wanted it to be a really kind of fun, jovial, really evening where
Yeah.
like Tina had been saying that she wanted to she wanted to be dating again, and she wanted to take her mind off of Fashion Week. She had flown in from Paris, so she was incredibly tired. And this is all real. Let me just say, like, people do question, like, where are the lines between reality and television? Of course, editing happens, but when like Dorothy and I brought the two boys over, like, I mean, you could just tell something has shifted with Tina. I didn't realize in that moment how affected she was and would have been. But ultimately, like, we are all friends. We all care about each other. And I sat there with Vika and Lynn and Nam, and Dorothy went over to Tina. Of course, you don't want to um, overwhelm her, and you want to give her some space to do her thing. And I was glad that Dorothy went over to check in on her, and we very quickly kind of wrapped up that evening after Tina, she had that reaction. Um, but yeah, I mean, we have to balance, yeah, as you say, filming and our friendships. But yeah, ultimately we care about each other, and we want all of us to be healthy and happy and able to function well. And so, in terms of we're also trying to help and support Tina in making the decisions to find the support she needs. And she has done that in the ways that she can at the moment. It's not always easy
No,
to
some
go
people
down
aren't
those.
ready to look
Right.
at that traumatic issue.
Yeah. And so I hope she's still taking care. I saw her the other day, and um, I didn't ask her about. I mean, I don't ask her about that specifically because it's not really my space to prod, I guess. But she knows that I care for her. We all care for her, and we just want the best for her. And so, but we all live incredibly busy lives, and New York doesn't really afford us the time
Self-care.
to find self care. Yeah, I came home to Vancouver actually this weekend to spend some time with family just for 3 days, and I have therapy on Monday because
Oh,
I
thank
can I
you.
can do
Thank
it
you
here.
for
Yeah.
going.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's something that I for a long time didn't think I needed necessarily, and so it's such a long time that I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know I needed. I guess is what it is, and I wasn't ready, and so um, I am very glad to figure those things out.
Well,
Yeah.
not to dig too much into that, but I mean, what prompted you to say, "Hey, maybe this might be a good idea?" Because a lot of, um, again, not to categorize people, but for lack of a more comprehensive term, a lot of AAPI males that present don't think that therapy is going to help them. They say there's
Right.
some people that say, "Well, why don't you drink a beer or just like hug your family?" And just through my background, that's not necessarily going to fix a lot of these deeper seated issues.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as idyllic as my upbringing was, there were definitely moments. My dad had a stroke when I was quite young, and
Yeah.
there are moments that are difficult for me to really recollect. And I think that friends were saying, "Hey, maybe you should just try talking to someone." And in doing so, I'm realizing there are there's much more of a layered um, childhood that I realized. I had to grow up quite quickly, um, and so because of that, I guess there are certain markers of trauma on my psychological self, and so I'm trying to find ways to work through that. And well, I don't know if like the idea of is I don't like this idea of work through it, but like kind of
Address it.
addressing and integrating, I guess, what might come up in the ways in which in the ways in which that shows up. I think for so long, because it has been quite a long time that it's been present, um, no, like unknown to myself probably, but it just, my reactions might just show up in what I believe as a natural reaction, but ultimately it's maybe much more layered than that.
Well, you showed on the show that you are still coping, still processing, and I don't think that ever ends, but it is a process. The grief of the loss of your father, and you were integrating Chinese traditions as well. So, how are you continuing to process that? Because the loss of a parent, especially as wonderful as your father sounds, is just so difficult.
Yeah, it is really hard. Yeah, I mean, I have an altar at home, which someone close to me was actually really smart of them to offer me, to help me build it, or help me set it up, which is really great. Um, I do in many ways believe in these ideas around kind of Chinese death, we'll say, like the traditions around Chinese death. And so what I showed on the show is something that I do regularly for my grandfather, my mother's side,
Mhm.
but that I brought to my dad. Um, and for me, these moments of meditation, I guess we could say, and prayer, allow me to, in certain ways, connect with my dad. Um, and so, yeah, I do these burnings.
Yeah.
I guess
And
these
we're
offering.
not talking about on his skin, guys. Like this is
No.
yeah.
Yeah, I essentially I go to buy joss paper
Mhm.
offerings, which are either like paper in the shape of like gold ingots or paper blessings, prayers with like Buddhas on them and different kinds of scripture on them. But then sometimes also like there's a festival in Chinese culture that's called Qingmingjie, and that means it's like a tomb sweeping festival, and that's the day that essentially the Day of the Dead, where the the distance between us and our ancestors is much closer, and so we are supposed to go visit their graves, clean their graves, and that's when we burn these offerings. But sometimes you can buy people clothing, like
Mhm.
paper clothing or paper cars, or like I think last year I bought my dad a paper camera because he was really into photography. And so in that way, you're able to like memorialize or remember like their hobbies and the things that they loved. So yeah, I do that a lot. And when I am in Vancouver, I do go visit his grave, just to say hi, just to check in. And I say on the show, like eagles are my memory of my dad.
Mm.
And I just arrived here in Vancouver last night, and today I've already seen 3 or 4 eagles. So it's kind of,
It's
it's like,
amazing.
and it's amazing. Yeah, he's like kind of welcoming me home. But yeah, as you said as well, like losing a parent is incredibly decentering. It's incredibly destabilizing. Yeah, and I am still reeling from it. It's really hard. He was really my compass for my life. I really organized my projects around him, around like to have the ability and the freedom to be able to come home to visit.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I'm still trying to figure out what that all means for me, but trying to process still.
Well, I'm sure he's so proud of you. I know I am
Thank
seeing
you.
all the things that you're getting yourself into, all good things. No drinking, dad, like it's
No,
he's not partying
I
like
mean, yeah, my yeah, I mean, I think he'd be happy if I party. That's the one thing with my dad. You see, he never held me back. He was always like, "Go do your thing. I'm here. I support you." Um, yeah, he never wanted me to be in Vancouver, in the sense like he didn't want me to get stuck here. And I think I really am very appreciative of that. And then simultaneously, um, my mother, my parents divorced at some, when I was a teenager, and uh, the way that she continued to care for my dad, uh, again, I mean, she really is an angel, honestly. Like that just doesn't happen for a lot of people. She would cook for him. She did his taxes.
wow.
Yeah, she like honestly like I really am so in awe of how she is able to show up for me ultimately, you know. Um we have our own issues in our relationship. She's also a Scorpio. So there is definitely a little bit of fighting, but um yeah, she's yeah. Both my parents again have been really amazing.
But I wanted to point out it's not always about getting along with everyone in your life. It's how can you come back from conflict and still love each other and communicate, right?
Yeah, I mean, you say that I'm trying to learn to be better at dealing with conflict. I'm very conflict averse, um, and I think that's because I didn't really grow up around conflict.
Mm.
And so I don't really know how to deal with it. And so thanks to therapy, I am trying to figure it out.
Well, there's a lot of conflict on the show that happens. And so how do you kind of navigate that? I mean, the way that it was shown is that you are trying to be a peacekeeper and trying to bring people together. But essentially, sometimes that doesn't always work. So how does that
Right.
kind of play out with your conflict avoidance?
Right. So like I guess like in the show in particular, like I was never the center of anyone's conflict.
No.
And so ultimately I want my friends to all be heard, you know. In the scene with Nam and Richard and Vika, I mean, there was a conflict between Nam and Richard, and I really don't think that Richard was listening to Nam. And I was, of course present, and but sometimes you can just like you just kind of hit yourself against the wall when someone is just not being receptive and ultimately
Right.
dismissing what the other person is saying. And so, I was actually very impressed with Nam in that moment because up until that point, she had never really been so expressive with how she felt what was going on. And so I was really trying to support her in that moment because I really just felt like Richard wasn't listening, neither to her nor to me when I was saying, hey, look, just, try and just take a step back. We all care about each other. We're all friends. Let's just like try and see someone else's side. And that's kind of how I'm learning to to approach conflict, to approach conflict for me or conflict for others, but to step outside of your ego, I guess is what it would be, and just try and be more of an observer and just not use I statements, not use you statement, or not use you statements.
Active
Pardon me.
listening. Yeah, I
Active listening.
statements.
Yeah. And that's, I think ultimately though, I'm also a journalist. And so
Mhm.
I think a lot of my training or self-learning as being a journalist has also informed how I'm able to show up in these kind of dialogue spaces.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
You're able to take the observer role, which is a very different approach than a lot of people because you're able to kind of healthily detached, but at the same time, you really care about someone, really show up for them. So,
Right.
what I liked about the show though is that there was multidimensionality of all the castmates, and so one of my favorite aspects was Dorothy saying, "You guys like, do you guys just think that I don't have feelings?" And so, the question that I got from some folks was that is Dorothy scary? Like, because sometimes she was portrayed that way, and how do you manage that when she gets into conflict?
Yeah, it's funny because like today I had dim sum with a bunch of friends and they were saying, yeah, that at the beginning they weren't such a fan of Dorothy, but at the end of the series, like they really understood where she was coming from. Um, let me say that I love Dorothy. I love the fact that she is so outspoken,
Yes.
so direct. She knows where her boundaries are. She knows how to rub up against other people's boundaries. And
You said
she's
that so well.
no, I mean, hey, look, she's very good with her words. Um, and I mean, yeah, she's just a very intelligent woman and she knows how to craft stuff. But ultimately she is very emotionally aware. And yes, when she's direct with you, of course she can be scary because she's able to be direct. But I would rather her be direct than maybe certain people who are maybe passive aggressive
Yeah.
um or just not willing to share and not be direct. Uh, did I get any direct conflict with her? Not well. She said some things to me, but not explicitly. But as I said, yeah, I'd rather friends be like direct, and then you can deal with it, and then you move on. And
Yeah.
I think with Dorothy in particular, she's not going to be the type of person that like attaches to something and resents something forever and ever, unless you hurt her friends. And that I think is what makes her such an amazing person because she really cares about the people around her.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing the way that she showed up for Tina and just tried to make her feel better, and knowing that she can't completely do that for her, but just to give
Yeah.
her that space to celebrate her, to
Mhm.
just treat her. That was just it was so wonderful to see that.
Yeah, I think they have a great friendship as well. I mean, like, and in that moment, like, essentially, Dorothy and I made a mistake. We did something that was ultimately uh, hurtful to our friend, and that's regretful. And we needed to deal with what was happening, or not deal is the wrong word, but we needed to acknowledge what came up and just like move past it very quickly.
You
Harder
know,
to do on camera because you're working and you don't know exactly what it is. But yes, as I said before, Tina is a friend, and we want to make sure that she is okay.
it could be a turning point too for Tina in that like you guys didn't mean anything malicious, and that it really did point out like, hey, there's some raw spots here that I need to deal with. And she ultimately went in that direction to find some
Mm.
sources of healing. Well, and Dorothy got a man too. So I mean, I know you can't reveal those
Yeah, I mean,
details, but
sure. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, that was really just like a side thing. Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised, but yeah, that happened.
So, thinking a little bit about your future and even your present, what does success look like to you as it continues to evolve?
Yeah, that's hard to really answer. I mean, I think I'm the same person as I was when I was filming, when, in the scene on the rooftop when I just call my mom, the idea of like, she says my dad would be proud of me, we're proud of you, and all these things. I think um, it's really hard for me to pinpoint and recognize the kind of success that I've had. I do try to create a distance and step out of myself and be like, oh my God, wow. Like I look at my CV, I'm like, oh wow, you started this magazine, you did this incredible thing with that publication. Wow, you're building this other thing here. You have shot a television show in China and a film and like all these things. And I'm like, wow, I still don't feel like I've done anything. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit of the perfectionist that I have within me, the idea that one can never be successful because there's always something to strive for. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like. All I know that is I want to continue doing amazing projects, tell incredible stories, and try and touch people in emotionally or yeah, emotionally uh, through what I do. There are definitely goals that I have. I want to be able to do more acting, more television work, more film work. That isn't always up to me.
No, it's
I
coming. It's more and
uh,
more are coming. And,
I appreciate that.
I think our values are very much aligned in like really just storytelling is so powerful. And I'm just so
Mhm.
glad that you're able to tell your story here because there's so many aspects and layers that were not portrayed. Didn't have enough time, obviously, thinking about all these things that you've been through that kind of all converge to make the person that you are on the show. It's just amazing to hear. You also spoke about not you don't know what your family's going to look like in the future and your
Mhm.
partner and so forth. And so, I mean, you were having a really honest conversation with your cousin and like with your mom. And I mean, how do you put yourself out there and talk about those things? Because there's a lot of people in our communities that wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable telling their family that.
Yeah.
That happened.
That happened. I mean, as I said, like I grew up with no one questioning who I was, and I was always just doing my thing. But at the same time, I didn't really talk about stuff with my mom and like family and what does it all look like in the future. And so,
Right.
um, yeah, it was a conversation that because like I never came out. I don't know if I said that already. Like there's never like this like, oh, I am dating not woman or whatever,
Mhm.
a not cis woman. And so yeah, having that conversation with my cousin was fine. Like we're the same generation. Like she's like essentially a foil for the rest of our family, and she knows that I'm open and whatever, and like she's of course doesn't care, but of course like our family is kind of traditional ish ish
Ish. Yeah.
ish. um I don't know. I mean, I guess it is because like I'm named after my great grandfather, and like people are named after me. There's like kind of certain like kind of like social conventions that are my
Sure.
family, my Chinese name, we'll say, that we follow, and so in that way we're traditional. And yeah, when I had the conversation with my mom, I'm like, I don't know what my family's gonna look like. Are you like? I just wanted to honestly, I really wanted to make sure that she wasn't shielding me from people, from the rest of the family. Um, and I was astounded by the way that she responded. One, she's like I could tell she was very nervous because,
Well, I
she
saw
had
her
never,
eyes dart. I don't know. The
yeah,
psychologist in me was like, I saw her eyes dart to the camera when she was answering you in
yeah,
that little brief second.
yeah. What is that? Because of that you thought it was her anxiety, or she was like trying
Well,
to get some sort of like external feedback? Is like, is this okay?
No, just like, oh, I know I'm being watched and
Yeah,
we're having this very important conversation with my son. And so it was just more of like the awareness that there's this extra layer of cameras,
for sure.
not
Yeah, which
not
is which
privacy.
is a very strange thing to be doing. But yeah, like when she showed up, she knew exactly what she wanted. Like she was like, and they cut it out, but we were talking. She's like, "So when are you gonna have a baby?"
Oh, I wish they
I'm
would kept
like,
that
"Oh,
in.
I know." She's like, "My customer just had a baby. When are you having a baby?" I'm like, "Oh, okay. You're just going straight in for the kill, then, mom." I'm like, "Okay, I guess we're gonna have this." But yeah, like the way that she responded was amazing. I mean, she just wants me to be happy. She wants me to be surrounded by people I love and care about me, and care for me, and that when she gets the grandchild, because she wants one, um, that she wants it to be healthy.
Yeah.
She wants them
Well,
to be healthy,
ultimately that's what it's all about. And so
right? That really is, yeah.
I know that people are going to want to continue following what you're doing and, connect with you. And so where can they continue to support you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram, just at Blake Abbie. I also just started a xiaohongshu in China, if you want to follow me in Chinese. And so that's Blake Abbie underscore Wang Limin. And then, yeah, some other social media like TikTok is Blabby, BLA underscore
So cute.
BBIE. That's what people call me. Actually, Tina calls me Brainy Blabby
That's
because
so
I
cute.
always try to bring some sort of cerebral energy into a conversation. But yeah, that's me.
Well, like, thank you so much for taking the time and spending Saturday just talking to me. And you are just such an amazing person. I have to say that,
I
a
really
human
appreciate
being.
you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and being interested in my story. Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to support us for free by subscribing to our mailing list at colorsuccesspodcast.com. There, you will find our socials, YouTube channel, and all episodes on streaming platforms for great additional content. As Rob Heaps from Partner Track said, success is contagious, so come catch it.